Imagine standing in a room full of people who once judged you, and the man who broke your heart suddenly reappears, begging for one more chance. But before you can breathe, another hand, strong, warm, dangerous, slides around your waist. You turn, and it's him, the mafia boss everyone fears, the man who never touches anyone in public. Yet tonight, he pulls you close, lowers his mouth to yours, and kisses you like a promise. Across the room, your ex stares, frozen, shocked, furious. And that's when the mafia boss leans to your ear and whispers the words that stop the entire world. Let him watch the woman he failed to keep. But why would a man like Mafia Boss claim a woman like Elara, especially in front of her past? And what secret did he see the moment he looked into her eyes? Tonight is the beginning of a story filled with obsession, redemption, danger, and a love powerful enough to rewrite destiny. Black Rose. Before pulls you deeper into the underworld, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a single chapter of this dangerous, breathtaking love story. Now, let's begin. The crystal champagne flute felt like a lead weight in Elara's hand. Around her, the charity gala hummed with a life she couldn't touch, a symphony of clinking glass, murmured pleasantries, and soft, meaningless laughter. It was a world of polished surfaces and even more polished lies. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city's skyline a tapestry of distant, cold lights, mirroring the hollow feeling in her chest. She shouldn't have come. She knew it the moment the invitation, embossed and pretentious, had arrived, but her best friend Maya had insisted. It's been 6 months, Elara. You need to get back out there. Show him you're not crumbling. Crumbling? The word was too gentle. What Alistair had done wasn't a collapse. It was a calculated demolition. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had made her question every moment of their 2 years together, every whispered, "I love you," every plan for a future that had turned out to be a beautiful painted backdrop for a stage he had already left. And then she saw him. He was across the room, holding court as he always did, Alistair Pierce. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, his smile a weapon of charm he wielded with ruthless efficiency. His arm was draped around the waist of a woman Elara recognized from the society pages, a shipping heiress. Of course, he'd traded up. Her stomach twisted, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over her. She was the discarded starter model, the one he'd been with before he could afford the luxury edition. She turned abruptly, her back to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. The room felt suddenly airless. She needed to leave, now. She set her glass down on a passing tray, with a hand that trembled slightly. "Elara? Is that you?" The voice was like a key turning in a rusted lock, opening a door to a room full of ghosts. It was him, Alistair. He had approached her silently, his new companion momentarily distracted by another group. She turned slowly, forcing her face into a mask of cool indifference. "Alistair," he said, "you look well." His eyes doing a quick, assessing sweep of her. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress, a far cry from the glittering gowns around her, but it made her feel armored. She said thank you, her voice flat. He shifted his weight, a practiced look of contrition softening his features. "Look, Alistair, I've been hoping to run into you. I owe you an apology, a real one. The way things ended, it was messy. I handled it poorly." Poorly? He ended their relationship with a text message. A text. After 2 years? After talking about marriage? About children? "This isn't working for me anymore. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same." Messy was an understatement. It was cruel. "There's nothing to apologize for, Alistair," she said, her tone implying the exact opposite. It's in the past. But it's not, is it? He pressed, taking a half step closer. He lowered his voice. I see the way you're looking at me. I know I hurt you. I was confused. I was under a lot of pressure from my father to make certain connections. But seeing you now, it reminds me of what we had. Elara felt a cold fury ignite in her veins. He wasn't apologizing for her benefit. He was doing it to absolve his own guilt, to rewrite history into a simple mistake instead of a conscious betrayal. He was trying to pull her back into his narrative, to make her a supporting character in his story once again. Don't, she whispered, her mask cracking. Just don't. I miss you, Elara, he murmured, his voice dripping with a false sincerity that made her nauseous. Maybe we could. He never finished the sentence. A shift occurred in the atmosphere of the room. It wasn't a sound, but a silence. A sudden, palpable wave of attention that moved like a tide, pulling the focus of the crowd toward the main entrance. The gentle hum of conversation dipped, replaced by a charged, wary curiosity. She followed the collective gaze, and her breath caught in her throat. A man stood in the doorway, not having entered so much as having materialized. He was tall, with a presence that seemed to swallow the light and sound around him. He wasn't dressed in a tuxedo like the other men, but in an impeccably tailored dark charcoal suit that spoke of power, not conformity. His hair was black as midnight, brushed back from a strong, angular face, but it was his eyes that held her captive. Even from across the room, she could see they were a startling pale gray, like chips of winter ice. They scanned the crowd with a detached, unnerving intensity, missing nothing. Kaelen. She didn't know his last name. No one ever said it out loud. He was just Kaelen, a man spoken of in hushed tones, a king in a shadow kingdom that existed just beneath the surface of their glittering world. He was a myth, a ghost story told to scare ambitious men. And he was here. His gaze swept the room, and for a heart-stopping second, it landed on her. It felt like a physical touch, a jolt of electricity that rooted her to the spot. Those icy eyes didn't linger, moving on as if she were just another face in the crowd, but the impression remained, seared in her skin. Alistair, momentarily forgotten, let out a low, impressed whistle. Well, the ghost himself. I heard he was back in the city. My father's been trying to get a meeting with him for months. He looked back at Elara, his own drama suddenly seeming trivial. Forget I said anything. This is a much bigger opportunity. Elara barely heard him. She was still reeling from the brief, electric contact of that gaze. She watched as Kaelen moved through the room. He didn't smile. He didn't shake hands. People parted for him, a sea of silk and sequins yielding to a shark. He acknowledged a few with a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of a royal decree. She felt a strange, irrational urge to flee. His presence was a storm cloud in the elegant room, a promise of danger that made the air crackle. She took a step back, intending to slip away to the ladies' room to gather her shattered composure away from Alistair's smarmy apology and this new, terrifying presence. But Alistair, ever the opportunist, saw his chance. As Kaelen passed within a few feet of them, Alistair stepped forward, a sycophantic smile plastered on his face. Mr. Kaelen, I'm Alistair Pierce. My father is Robert Pierce, of Pierce Holdings. It's an honor to have you here.
Kaelen stopped. He turned his head slowly, those winter-gray eyes settling on Alistair with an expression of utter boredom. He didn't speak. He simply waited, forcing Alistair to squirm in this silence. This is my... Elara. Alistair stammered, gesturing vaguely toward her, using her as a social shield, a conversational prop. Kaelen's gaze shifted from Alistair to her. this time, it was not a passing glance. It was a full, penetrating assessment. It traveled from the simple elegance of her black dress up to her face, which she knew was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of residual hurt from Alistair and sheer, unadulterated shock at the man now staring at her. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers were clenched at her sides. He saw the wounded pride in her eyes, the unshed tears she was refusing to let fall. And in that moment, something shifted in his own expression. The cold detachment didn't melt, but it was joined by something else. A spurk of recognition? Interest? It was gone so fast, she thought she might have imagined it. Alistair, misreading the silence as an invitation, blundered on. Yes, Elara and I were just catching up. We have a bit of a history. He gave a conspiratorial laugh that made Elara's skin crawl. Kaelen's gaze remained locked on hers. He completely ignored Alistair, as if he were nothing more than an irritating fly. He took a single, deliberate step toward her. The space around them seemed to shrink, the noise of the gala fading into a distant buzz. Elara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the faint, thin scar that bisected his left eyebrow. He smelled of cold, night air, sandalwood, and something uniquely, dangerously male. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He simply reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His fingers, strong and surprisingly warm, brushed against her chin, tilting her face up just a fraction to meet his gaze fully. And then he spoke, his voice a low, gravelly murmur meant only for her, a sound that vibrated deep in her bones. "You look lost," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. And in those 3 simple words, he saw through everything. Her brave facade, her hurt, her humiliation. He saw the echo of her broken heart, and he named it. Elara couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She was trapped in the storm of his presence, in the intensity of his gaze. Alistair, standing forgotten and bewildered, cleared his throat. "I say, what is the meaning of this?" Kaelen didn't even glance his way. His eyes still held Elara's, a silent question in their depths. He was waiting for her to accept this lifeline he was offering, this escape from the prison of her past. The entire gala was watching now, a frozen tableau, the discarded girlfriend, the arrogant ex, and the most dangerous man in the city. Elara felt a choice crystallize before her. She could step back, retreat into the safety of her pain, and let Alistair win this small, bitter battle. Or she could step into the unknown, into the storm that was Kaelen. She took a shallow, shaky breath, and then she leaned ever so slightly into his touch. It was the barest of movements, a surrender so small only he could have felt it, but it was enough. A flicker of something dark and possessive ignited in Kaelen's eyes. His thumb stroked her chin once, a whisper of a caress. Then he turned his head, his gaze finally cut to Alistair. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "This conversation is over," Kaelen said, his voice flat and final, leaving no room for argument. He shifted his body, positioning himself slightly between her and Alistair, a clear, physical claim. He looked back down at her, his expression unreadable. "Come," he said, his voice still quiet, but now it held a note of command that was impossible to resist. He didn't wait for her to agree. He simply held out his hand, palm up, an unspoken offer, an invitation to walk away from her past and into a future that was terrifying, uncertain, but brimming with a raw, potent power she had never felt before. Elara stared at his outstretched hand. It was a line, and once she crossed it, there would be no going back. She looked from his hand to his face to the stunned, furious expression on Alistair's. And she made her choice. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, strong and sure, enveloping her cold hand in a warmth that seeped all the way to her soul. A jolt, sharp and electric, passed between them. He didn't smile, but his grip tightened almost imperceptibly. Without another word, he turned, leading her away from Alistair, away from the gawking crowd, through the parted sea of people. He didn't look back. He moved with the absolute certainty of a man who never had to. Elara walked beside him, her legs feeling like jelly, her mind a whirlwind. She was holding the hand of a myth. She had just publicly humiliated her ex with the most formidable man in the city. She had no idea where he was taking her, or why he had chosen her. But for the first time in 6 months, the hollow ache in her chest was gone, replaced by a wild, thrilling, and utterly terrifying sense of anticipation. The storm had her now, and she was walking right into its eye. The world had narrowed to the feel of his hand around hers. It was the only real thing. The solid, warm anchor in a sea of stunned faces and muffled whispers. Kaelen's grip wasn't harsh, but it was absolute. It was a claim, a statement written in the simple, shocking act of their joined hands. Elara could feel the calluses on his palm, a rough texture that spoke of a life far removed from the polished floors and soft hands of the gala, a life of action, of danger. He didn't rush. His pace was measured, confident, as he led her through the crowd. People melted out of their path, their expressions a mixture of fear, curiosity, and outright shock. Elara kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, on the broad expanse of his back, on the way his dark suit jacket stretched taut across his shoulders. She didn't dare look back at Alistair. She could feel his glare burning into her, a laser of pure, impotent fury. She had rejected his pathetic, self-serving apology and had been claimed by a king in front of his entire court. The humiliation for him would be absolute. And a small, dark, wounded part of her, the part he had created with his betrayal, sang with a fierce, vengeful joy. They reached the grand, ornate doors of the ballroom, which were held open by 2 severe-looking men in dark suits, who nodded almost imperceptibly to Kaelen. His men, of course. They stepped out into the cooler, quieter air of the hotel's lobby, the sound of the gala fading behind them like a forgotten dream. Only then did Kaelen stop. He released her hand, and the sudden absence of his touch felt like a loss, leaving her skin tingling and cold. He turned to face her, his winter gray eyes scanning her face, assessing the aftermath of their dramatic exit. "Are you all right?" His voice was still that low, gravelly murmur, but it was different now, away from the prying eyes. It was less of a command and more of a question, though it still held an undeniable intensity. Elara took a shaky breath, wrapping her arms around herself. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving a trembling vulnerability in its wake. I don't know," she answered honestly. I'm not sure what that was." "A necessary intervention," he stated, his eyes unwavering. "A man like that preys on vulnerability. He saw your pain and thought it was an opening. I closed it." His perception was unnerving. He had seen everything, understood the entire dynamic in a single glance. "Why?" she whispered, the question tumbling out. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Kaelen considered her for a long moment, his head tilted slightly. The lobby's soft lighting carved the sharp planes of his face into stark relief. "I know enough," he stated, his voice still low. "I saw a woman of quiet strength being tormented by a boy playing at being a man. It was an imbalance. I don't care for imbalances." His answer was so simple, so matter-of-fact, as if intervening in the personal dramas of strangers was a regular pastime for him. Perhaps it was. Perhaps he saw the world as a series of scales that needed to be kept in check. Before she could form a response, one of his men approached. "The car is ready, sir." Kaelen nodded, then looked back at Elara. I'll have my driver take you home. The offer was a dismissal, a polite final end to this bizarre interlude. He had done his chivalrous duty and was now moving on. The thrilling, terrifying anticipation she had felt moments ago curdled into a sharp pang of disappointment. She didn't want this to be over. This strange, protective fury he had embodied was a drug, and she was already craving another hit. "Wait," she said, the word leaving her lips before her brain could catch up. He paused, one eyebrow lifting in silent inquiry. She swallowed, her courage feeling very small. I don't even know your name. Not really." A flicker of something, amusement, crossed his features. "Kaelen." "Just Kaelen?" "For now, that's all you need," he replied. His tone wasn't unkind, but it was a firm boundary. "Elara," she said, feeling foolish for stating the obvious. "I know." The two words were spoken softly, but they sent a shiver down her spine. He knew. Had he known before tonight? Or had he asked someone in the brief moments after he'd seen her? The implication was staggering. He gestured toward the hotel's main entrance, where a sleek, black luxury car idled silently at the curb, looking more like a predatory beast than a vehicle. "Your chariot awaits, Elara." This was it, the end of the fairy tale. She would get in the car, be driven to her modest apartment, and tomorrow she would wake up and wonder if it had all been a dream. The thought was unbearable. She took a step closer to him, ignoring the way his men subtly tensed. She looked up, meeting his gaze, pouring every ounce of her newfound courage into her eyes. "I don't want to go home." The silence that followed was profound. Kaelen studied her, his expression unreadable. He was clearly a man who was rarely surprised, and she had just surprised him. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them until she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was so tall, his presence so overwhelming this close. "And what is it you want?" he asked, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that was for her ears only. "I want to forget. I want to feel something other than this ache. I want to see if the storm is as wild as it seems from the outside." The thoughts raced through my mind, but I gave voice to the simplest, most honest one. "I don't want to be alone tonight." It was a reckless admission, a dangerous one. She was handing him a vulnerability far greater than any Alistair had ever seen. She was placing her trust, her safety, in the hands of a man known as a ghost, a king of shadows. Kaelen's eyes darkened, the pale gray turning to the color of a gathering thunderstorm. He reached out, not touching her, but his fingers came close to her cheek, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "That is a very dangerous thing to say to a man like me, Elara," he murmured, a warning and a promise woven together in his tone. "I'm beginning to think I might like danger," she whispered back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. For a long, suspended moment, he just looked at her, his gaze tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her lips, the fear and defiance in her eyes. He was weighing her, judging her sincerity, calculating the risks. Then the slightest of a nod. "Very well." He turned to his man. "Change of plans. We're going to the penthouse." The man, to his credit, showed no reaction beyond another curt nod. Kaelen placed a hand on the small of Elara's back, a gesture of pure possession that sent a fresh wave of heat through her. He guided her toward the car, and a driver leapt out to open the rear door. She slid inside the plush, leather-lined interior, the door closing with a soft, definitive thud that sealed her fate. Kaelen settled in beside her, his large frame taking up a surprising amount of space. The partition between the front and back seats was up, plunging them into a private, intimate world. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly into the night. Elara stared out the tinted window at the blur of city lights, her mind reeling. What had she just done? She was in a car with a Mafia boss, on her way to his penthouse, because she had told him she didn't want to be alone. It was the most insane, impulsive decision of her life. She felt her gaze on her and turned to face him.
He wasn't smiling. His expression was serious, contemplative. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked, as if reading the turmoil in her mind. "Yes," she admitted, "but I'm not going to change my mind." "Why?" "Because for the first time since Alistair, I don't feel broken. I feel alive." He absorbed this, his gaze intense. "He did a number on you, didn't he?" The question was blunt, but not unkind. It was a demand for the truth she had already offered him. "He made me feel like I was nothing," she said softly, looking down at her hands. "Like our entire relationship was a lie, that I was a placeholder until something better came along. And tonight he thought he could just pick me up again, like a toy he'd forgotten on a shelf." Kaelen was silent for a moment. The only sound was the soft hum of the car's engine.
Finally, his voice like gravel. "He saw a fragile woman. I see a phoenix. He tried to bury you in ashes. I'm merely giving you the space to rise from them." Elara's breath hitched. His words were like a balm, healing wounds she thought would never close. No one had ever seen her that way, not even herself. The car came to a stop beneath a glittering, ultra-modern high-rise, a needle of glass and steel piercing the sky. This was his domain. The driver opened the door, and Kaelen led her out, his hand returning to the small of her back as he guided her past a doorman who stood at rigid attention, through a lobby of minimalist opulence, and into a private elevator. He pressed a button, and the elevator began a silent, swift ascent. They stood side by side, their reflections staring back at them from the polished brass doors. She looked small next to him, her black dress a stark contrast to his powerful, dark-suited frame. Her eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed. He looked imposing, unmoved, a statue of controlled power. The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse. Elara stepped out and stopped dead, her jaw going slack. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress in the sky. The entire far wall was made of glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city laid out like a river of diamonds below them. The interior was vast, open, and sparsely furnished with clean, modern lines and dark colors. It was beautiful, but it was also cold, sterile. It felt more like a museum exhibit than a place where someone lived. There were no personal photographs, no knickknacks, no signs of life. It was the lair of a man who slept here but didn't truly reside. "Make yourself comfortable," Kaelen said, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a sleek black sofa. He walked to a crystal decanter on a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "Brandy. It will help with the shock." She took the glass, their fingers brushing. The contact was brief, but it sent another one of those electric jolts through her system. She took a sip, the liquor burning a warm path down her throat, steadying her nerves. "Thank you," she said, gesturing vaguely with her glass, "for all of this, for rescuing me." "I didn't rescue you," he corrected, moving to stand before the massive window, his back to her, as he looked out over his kingdom. "You rescued yourself. You were the one who chose to walk away. I just provided the path." He was giving her back her agency, her power. It was the exact opposite of what Alistair had always done. Alistair had made her feel like she needed him. Kaelen was making her feel like she was strong enough on her own, but that he was choosing to stand beside her anyway. She walked over to stand near him, not too close, but drawn to the mesmerizing view. "It's incredible." "It's a view," he said simply. "It reminds me of what I've built, what I control." The way he said it was so devoid of boastfulness. It was a simple statement of fact. He controlled the city, or at least the parts that mattered. She turned to look at his profile, strong and unyielding against the glittering backdrop. Why did you really do it, Kaelen? Why me? You could have anyone in that room. Models, heiresses, anyone. He finally turned his head to look at her, his icy eyes capturing hers. Anyone? He repeated, a subtle, dark amusement in his tone. Those women are polished shells, empty. They see my power, my money, and they see an accessory, a trophy. But when I looked at you, you weren't seeing a trophy. You were drowning. And when I offered you my hand, you didn't see a bank account or a weapon. You saw a lifeline. There is a fire in you, Elara, a strength that bastard tried to extinguish. I saw its last defiant embers, and I find I have a desire to see it burn again. His words were stripping her bare, seeing past the hurt, past the insecurity, to the core of who she was. It was the most intimate thing anyone had ever said to her. He closed the remaining distance between them until he was standing right in front of her. He didn't touch her, but the space between them crackled with tension. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice a rough caress. "Tell me you want to leave, and the car will take you anywhere you wish. But if you stay..." He reached up, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, a mirror of his gesture at the gala, but now filled with a world of intent. "If you stay, know that I am not a good man. My world is not safe. But what I claim, I protect. What is mine, I cherish. And right now, Elara, I have nothing more than to show you what it feels like to be cherished." Elara's heart was pounding so hard she felt lightheaded. This was the point of no return. This was the moment she stepped fully into the storm. She looked up into his fierce, beautiful, dangerous face and saw not a monster, but a man who recognized the broken pieces of her and didn't see them as flaws, but as a map of her survival. She placed her hand over his, where it rested against her cheek, holding it there. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, and that was all the permission he needed. A low, possessive sound rumbled in his chest. His other hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle despite its strength. He leaned down, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Tell me to see," he whispered, his voice warm against her skin, echoing his words from the gala, but giving them a new, deeper meaning. Let the whole world see the woman he failed to keep. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle exploratory kiss. It was a claiming, a conflagration. His lips were firm and demanding, moving over hers with a raw, untamed passion that stole the breath from her lungs. It was a kiss that held back nothing. It was all heat and hunger and a desperate burning need. It was the kiss of a man who took what he wanted, but who in this moment was giving her everything. Elara melted into him, her hands coming up to clutch at the front of his shirt, holding on for dear life as the world fell away. The sterile penthouse, the glittering city, the ghost of Alistair's betrayal, it all vanished, burned to ash in the inferno of Kaelen's kiss. This was what she had been missing. This was the feeling she had been desperate for. Not just passion, but power. The power to make this formidable, untouchable man lose his legendary control. She kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the last 6 months, all the hurt, the anger, the loneliness, transforming it into a fierce, answering passion. He groaned, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her flush against his hard, unyielding body. She felt small and delicate in his embrace, yet incredibly powerful.
She was the one setting him on fire. He broke the kiss, both of them breathing heavily, their foreheads resting together. His gray eyes were stormy, dark with desire, the ice completely melted. Elara. He breathed her name like a prayer, a vow. He didn't say anything else. He simply swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She gasped, her arms instinctively winding around his neck as he carried her away from the window, through the vast cold living space and into the shadows of his private quarters. The bedroom was as minimalist as the rest of the penthouse. A large, low-platform bed with black linens, more glass walls looking out over the night. He laid her down in the center of the bed, following her down, caging her with his body. He looked down at her, his expression a mixture of awe and raw possession. "No one will ever hurt you again," he vowed, his voice low, deadly serious. And as his lips found hers again, as his hands began to explore her body with a reverence that belied his brutal strength, Elara believed him. In the heart of the storm, in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, she had finally found her sanctuary.
The world was reduced to sensation. The soft, cool brush of black silk sheets beneath her bare skin, the hard, warm weight of him above her, the scent of sandalwood and male heat, an intoxicating perfume that was uniquely Kaelen. And his mouth was everywhere. On her lips, her throat, the sensitive curve of her shoulder, each kiss a brand, a silent, potent vow. Elara was lost in him, her fingers tangled in the dark silk of his hair, holding him to her as if he were the only real thing in a universe that had, until tonight, been built on shifting sand. His touch was not gentle, but it was reverent. It was the touch of a man who understood the value of what he was being given, a man who took with an intensity that was in itself a form of worship. When his hands finally slowly pushed the straps of her black dress down her arms, she didn't feel exposed. She felt revealed. He looked at her, his winter gray eyes dark with a storm of desire, and he didn't just see her body. He saw her, the fire, the strength, the embers he had vowed to fan into flame. "Beautiful," he rasped, the single word sounding like a sacred truth on his lips. He made love to her with a fierce, consuming passion that left no room for thought, for past hurts, for future fears. It was a claiming, yes, but it was also a gift. With every touch, every whispered encouragement in that rough, gravelly voice, he was rebuilding her. He was showing her a strength and her own passion she never knew she possessed. She wasn't a passive participant. She was his equal in this dance, meeting his intensity with her own, arching into his touch, pulling him closer, drowning in the sensation of being truly, completely wanted. Later, wrapped in the warmth of his arms and the cocoon of his bedsheets, the city lights twinkling far below like a distant galaxy, the reality of it all began to seep back in. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a quiet, thrumming awe. She was lying naked in the bed of Kaelen, the Shadow King, the man whose name was spoken in whispers, and he was holding her as if she were something precious, his large hand splayed possessively on the bare skin of her hip. Her mind, now clearing from the haze of passion, began to whirl with questions. What happened now? Was this a one-night stand? A transaction of protection for passion? The thought sent a sharp pang through her chest, surprising her with its intensity. She had known him for less than a few hours, and yet the idea of this being the end was suddenly, terrifyingly unacceptable. As if sensing the shift in her thoughts, his hand stilled on her hip. "You're thinking too loudly." His voice rumbled against her hair where her head rested on his chest. She let out a shaky breath, the sound loud in the quiet room. "I'm just trying to process. This
It's a lot to process." He was silent for a moment, his fingers beginning to trace slow, absent-minded circles on her skin. "What is the part that concerns you the most?" "All of it," she admitted softly. "What this is, what happens tomorrow, who you really are." "Who I am is the man holding you. What this is whatever we decide it will be. And tomorrow," he paused, his hand stilling again, "tomorrow you will wake up here, with me." The simple, direct certainty in his voice was a balm to her spiraling anxiety. He wasn't asking, he was telling her. He was making a decision for both of them, and in her current state of emotional whiplash, she found it incredibly comforting. "But your world," she started, lifting her head to look at him. In the dim light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, his eyes gleaming like polished stone. "I'm a graphic designer, Kaelen. I make logos and brochures. I don't know anything about whatever it is you do." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "What I do is ensure that this city functions. I solve problems. Sometimes those problems are financial. Sometimes they are more physical." His gaze was steady, honest. "My world is not for the faint of heart, Elara. It is built on loyalty, respect, and when necessary, fear. But it is also my world, and if you are in it, you will be under my protection. Completely." It was a warning and a promise, all rolled into one. He wasn't sugarcoating it. He was telling her the truth of the danger, the darkness that clung to him, and he was telling her that he would be her shield against it. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. She thought about it. She thought about the cold look in his eyes when he dismissed Alistair. She thought about the silent, dangerous men who followed his every command. She should be terrified. She should be scrambling for her clothes and running for the hills. But looking at him now, feeling the solid, reassuring strength of his body next to her, the possessive weight of his hand on her, she felt only one thing. Safe. "I feel safe with you." The admission seemed to startle him. His eyes widened a fraction, and for the first time she had met him, he looked genuinely thrown. It was as if no one had ever associated the word safe with him before. He was danger incarnate, and yet she had found her sanctuary in his arms. A low growl sounded in his chest, and he rolled, pinning her gently down beneath him once more, cradling her face in his hands. He vowed, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name, "Then that is what you will be. For as long as you want this, for as long as you want me, you will be the safest woman in this city." He kissed her again, this kiss slower, deeper, more devastating than the first. It was a kiss that sealed a pact, a silent agreement between them. She was choosing the storm, and the storm was choosing her back. When they finally drifted into an exhausted, sated sleep, tangled together in the center of his vast bed, Elara's last conscious thought was that the echo of her broken heart had finally, blessedly, gone silent. The first thing Elara was aware of was warmth, a solid radiating heat at her back, and a heavy, comforting weight across her waist. Then came the scent, sandalwood and man, and the memories of the night before came flooding back in a vivid, breathtaking rush. She slowly opened her eyes. Morning light was streaming through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the sterile penthouse in shades of gold and pale gray. She was still in Kaelen's bed, and he was still there, his chest pressed against her back, one arm draped possessively over her, holding her close even in sleep. She lay perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, absorbing the reality of it. Kaelen, asleep. The sharp, dangerous planes of his face were softened in slumber, the perpetual intensity in his eyes hidden. He looked younger, yet no less powerful. He was still a predator even at rest. Carefully, she began to extricate herself, needing a moment to process, to use the bathroom, to just look at him without being under the hypnotic spell of his gaze. But the moment she shifted, his arm tightened around her, pulling her back flush against him. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was a sleep-roughened murmur against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. I need to use the bathroom," she stammered, her heart fluttering. He released her immediately, but his eyes were open now, watching her as she slipped from the bed, grabbing the sheet to wrap herself around. His gaze was hot, appreciative, tracking her every move as she padded across the cool floor and disappeared into the ensuite bathroom. Leaning against the closed door, she took a few steadying breaths. The bathroom was as minimalist as the bedroom, all dark marble and chrome. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. Her hair was a wild tangle, her lips were slightly swollen from his kisses, and there was a light in her eyes, a rosy glow to her skin that hadn't been there in months. She looked well-loved, happy. When she emerged, feeling slightly more composed, she found him sitting up in bed, the sheets pulled around his waist, revealing a torso sculpted from muscle and adorned with a few silvery faint scars that told stories of their own. He held out a hand to her. "Come here." It wasn't a request, it was a gentle command, one she was more than willing to obey. She went to him, placing her hand in his, and let him pull her back down onto the bed, into the circle of his arms. "Good morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. He brushed a stray hair from her face. "Good morning," she replied, her voice small. He studied her face, his gaze intense. "No regrets?" She shook her head. A genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. No regrets."
"Good." He kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of promise and a new day. "Then we begin." "Begin what?" "Our day," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You'll call in sick to work." I can't just... "You can." He interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You will. Today you are with me. I have things to attend to, but you will be with me." The possessiveness in his voice should have been stifling. After Alistair's controlling nature, it should have sent up red flags. But with Kaelen, it felt different. It didn't feel like he was trying to control her. It felt like he was claiming responsibility for her happiness, her safety, her well-being. It felt like being anchored, not caged. "Okay," she agreed softly. He seemed pleased by her easy acquiescence. "First breakfast, then we talk." An hour later, showered and dressed in the same black dress from the night before, a small, mundane detail that felt strangely intimate, Elara sat at the large polished dining table. A silent, efficient woman had appeared and laid out a spread of fresh fruit, pastries, coffee, and eggs. Kaelen, now dressed in dark trousers and a simple black sweater that made him look both casual and lethally dangerous, sat across from her, a tablet next to his plate, his phone never far from his hand. He was different in the daylight. The raw passion of the night had been banked, replaced by a focused, formidable intensity. He was a man with the weight of a world on his shoulders, and she was getting a glimpse of what that meant. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. He typed a quick, one-word response and set it down. "Everything okay?" she asked tentatively. "A minor irritation," he said, his eyes meeting hers. The hardness faded, replaced by that focused attention he seemed to reserve just for her. "Now, we talk. You have questions. Ask them." She took a sip of coffee, gathering her courage. "Alistair," she began, "what if he causes problems?" Kaelen's lip curled in a dismissive sneer. "He won't. He's already been dealt with." "Dealt with?"
A cold trickle of fear went down her spine. What does that mean? It means he received a visit early this morning from one of my associates. He was reminded of the value of his health, his family's business, and his silence. He now understands that you are under my protection. He will not contact you. He will not speak of you. To him, you no longer exist. Elara stared at him, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. It was so brutal, so final. The idea of Alistair, the arrogant, smug Alistair, being intimidated into silence was both shocking and deeply satisfying. This was the reality of Kaelen's world. Problems weren't discussed. They were eliminated. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me," he replied, his gaze steady. "It was a necessity. Protecting what is mine is my first priority." He leaned forward slightly. "But you need to understand, Elara. This is what it means to be with me. There is no half measure. There is no walking away without consequences. My enemies could see you as a weakness, a target." The gravity of his words settled over her. She wasn't just dating a dangerous man. She was entering a war zone. "I understand," she said, and she found that she did. The fear was there, a cold, sharp knot in her stomach. It was overshadowed by a fierce, protective feeling for the man in front of her, and a stubborn refusal to be scared away. She squeezed his hand, a small gesture of solidarity. "I'm with you." A flicker of approval crossed his face. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a hard, quick kiss to her knuckles. "Then let's go," he said, and led her out of the penthouse, back into the heart of his dangerous world.
The elevator's descent was silent and swift, a stark contrast to the frantic beating of Elara's heart. The intimate warmth of the penthouse, the taste of coffee and promise, was gone, replaced by the chilling efficiency of Kaelen in crisis mode. He hadn't released her hand, his grip a steel vice, both an anchor and a chain. He spoke into a small, discreet device in his other hand, his voice a low, clipped stream of commands. "Status. Understood. Secure the perimeter. No one enter out. I'm 2 minutes out." Elara dared a glance at his profile. The softness of the morning was a distant memory. His jaw was clenched, his icy eyes fixed on the elevator doors, as if he could blast them open with the force of his will. This was the man legends were made of, the man who solved problems with physical solutions. And she was walking right into the heart of one. The doors opened not into the opulent lobby, but into a stark, concrete underground garage. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and damp. A black SUV, identical to the one from the night before, but somehow more menacing, idled directly in front of them, its engine a low growl. 2 of his men, the same severe-faced ones from the gala, stood by the open rear door. Their eyes swept over her without a flicker of recognition before returning to scan the shadows of the garage. Kaelen guided her into the back seat, his hand never leaving the small of her back. He slid in beside her and the door thudded shut, plunging them into the soundproofed interior. The partition was up. The driver, a large man with a thick neck, met Kaelen's eyes in the rearview mirror for a split second before pulling out with a smooth, powerful surge. "Where are we going?" Elara whispered. Her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to control it. "A business of mine," Kaelen said, his gaze fixed out the tinted window. "There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" He finally turned to look at her. The warning was back in his eyes. "The kind you do not need details of. Remember what I said. Stay close, stay silent." The drive was short and tense. Elara watched the city blur past, the normalcy of people walking to work, buying coffee, living their lives, feeling like a scene from a movie she was no longer part of. They pulled up to a nondescript, multi-story building in the industrial part of the city.
It looked like a warehouse, but the windows were reinforced, and the single entrance was guarded by two more unsmiling men who immediately opened the heavy steel door as they approached. The inside was a shock. It was not a dusty warehouse, but a sleek, high-tech operations center. Banks of monitors showed security camera feeds from what seemed like dozens of locations. Men and a few women in dark, tactical-style clothing moved with quiet purpose, speaking into headsets. The air hummed with controlled urgency. This was the nerve center of his shadow empire. All activity stopped for a fraction of a second as Kaelen entered, every eye drawn to him. The respect and the fear in the room was palpable. He was their commander, and the battlefield had called. A man, older than the others, with a scar tracing his jawline, stepped forward. "Sir, he's in the back. We've contained the situation, but you need to see this." Kaelen gave a sharp nod. His hand found Elara's again, his grip firm. "Marcus, this is Elara. She does not leave my side." Marcus's eyes flicked to her, assessing her in a single, comprehensive glance. There was no judgment, only cold calculation. "Understood, sir." He led them through the main room and down a sterile, white hallway to a closed door. Another guard stood outside. He opened the door and Kaelen guided Elara inside. The room was an office, expensively furnished, but now in disarray. A chair was overturned, a dark, wet stain marred the expensive rug, and in the center of the room, on his knees, was a man. He was bruised and bleeding from a cut above his eye. His hands were bound behind his back. He looked up as they entered, his eyes wide with terror. When they landed on Kaelen, a sob escaped his lips. "Kaelen, sir, please, I can explain." Kaelen released Elara's hand and took a single step forward. He did not look at the man. He surveyed the room, his eyes taking in every detail of the disruption. The air grew colder. "Explain," Kaelen said, the single word dripping with menace. The man on the floor flinched. "It wasn't me. I was set up. Volkov's men. They forced me. They have my family." "Volkov," Kaelen repeated, the name a curse. He finally looked down at the trembling man. "You were entrusted with the shipment manifests. You gave them to a rival. You compromised my operations. You endangered the lives of every person in this building." "I had no choice," the man wept. Kaelen was silent for a long, terrifying moment. Elara stood frozen by the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt like she couldn't breathe. This was the reality. This was the physical problem-solving. She was witnessing a judgment. "Where is your family being held?" Kaelen asked, his voice dangerously soft. The man stammered out an address, a warehouse on the docks. Kaelen turned to Marcus. "Send a team. Extract them. Use whatever force is necessary." Marcus nodded and spoke quietly into his headset. Kaelen recked back to the trader. "Your family will be safe. That is a greater mercy than your betrayal deserved." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Thank you, sir. Thank—" "But loyalty," Kaelen interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. He made a slight gesture with his hand. Two men stepped forward and hauled the sobbing man to his feet. "Please, Kaelen, I'm sorry." Kaelen turned his back, effectively dismissing him from existence. He walked back to Elara as the man's pleas were dragged down the hall and out of earshot. His face was a mask of cold impassion, but when his eyes met hers, she saw a flicker of something else. Concern, a question. He was watching her, gauging her reaction to his brutal world. Elara felt sick. The coppery smell of blood was in her nose. The image of the terrified man was seared in her mind. This was the price of his protection. This was the darkness that funded the penthouse, the power, the safety he offered. It was real, and it was ugly. She expected him to say something, to justify it, to tell her it was necessary. He didn't. He simply waited, his gaze steady, allowing her to process the horror. She thought of Alistair, of his petty, emotional cruelty. It was nothing compared to this. This was life and death. This was a world where mistakes were paid for in blood, and she was standing in the center of it, holding the hand of its king. Her knees felt weak. She wanted to run, to scream, to go back to her simple life of logos and brochures. But as she looked into Kaelen's winter gray eyes, she didn't see a monster. She saw a ruler, a man who carried the terrible burden of command, who had to make brutal choices to protect what was his. He had shown mercy to the man's family, but he could not show weakness to his organization. He had brought her here, to the heart of the ugliness, and hadn't shielded her from it. He was testing her, showing her the true cost of his devotion. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she took a step forward, closing the small distance between them. She didn't speak. She simply slipped her hand back into his, lacing her fingers through his. Her hand was cold and trembling, but her grip was firm. His fingers tightened around hers instantly. A long, slow breath left his lungs, a breath she realized he had been holding. The tension in his shoulders eased, just a fraction. "Let's go home," he said, his voice low.
He led her out of the office, past the efficient chaos of the operations room, and back to the waiting SUV. No one looked at them. No one spoke. They drove back to the penthouse in silence. The morning sun was higher now, glinting off the skyscrapers. The normal world was still there, just outside the tinted windows, but it felt a million miles away. Back in the elevator, ascending to his sky fortress, Elara finally found her voice. It was small, but steady. "Are you all right?" she asked. He looked down at her, a genuine surprise in his eyes. In the midst of all that, after what she had just seen, she was asking about him. He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I am now," he said, and the raw honesty in his voice undid her. When the elevator doors opened, he didn't lead her to the living room. He led her straight back to the bedroom, to the rumpled sheets that still held the scent of their night together. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. He just held her, tightly, as if she were the only thing keeping him grounded. She held him back, her arms around his neck, her face pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. She could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he murmured into her hair. "You warned me. You didn't have to bring me, but you did. You showed me the truth. I need you to understand what I am," he said, pulling back to look at her, his eyes searching hers. "I am not the hero in a story. I am the man who does the terrible things so that the people I care about can live in peace." "I understand," she said, and she meant it. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now woven together with something else, a profound, unshakable connection. She had seen the darkest part of his world, and she had not let go of his hand. He kissed her then, not with the fierce passion of the night before, but with a deep, aching tenderness that spoke of gratitude and a vulnerability he showed no one else. It was a kiss of shared burdens, of silent promises. Later, as they lay tangled together in the quiet of the afternoon, the city humming far below, Elara knew there was no going back. The line had been crossed. She had seen the blood and the terror, and she had chosen to stay. She was no longer just a woman he was protecting. She was his sanctuary, too. The one person he could be with when the weight of his crown became too heavy to bear. The storm outside his world was raging, but in his arms, she had never felt more calm or more certain of where she belonged. The silence in the penthouse was no longer sterile. It was filled with the soft, shared rhythm of their breathing, the unspoken understanding that had settled between them in the wake of the morning's brutality. Kaelen held her as if she were made of glass, his touch impossibly gentle, his large hand stroking slow, soothing circles on her back. He didn't apologize again. He didn't try to explain or justify. His silence was its own form of communication, a raw, honest acknowledgement of the darkness he commanded and his gratitude that she had not fled from it. For Elara, that silence was more powerful than any words. He was letting her see the man behind the myth, the weight he carried, and the profound relief he found in her simple, steady presence. After a long while, he stirred. "You need clothes," he stated, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "And your things." The practical concern was so normal, so mundane, it was almost jarring. It pulled them both back from the edge of the abyss they had peered into. "My things?" she asked, lifting her head from his chest. "From your apartment," he clarified, his gaze steady. "You're not going back there to stay. It's not secure." The declaration should have felt overwhelming, moving in after less than 24 hours. But the logic was irrefutable. After what she had witnessed, the idea of returning to her lonely, unprotected apartment felt like a step backward into a life that no longer fit. Alistair knew where she lived, and now a man named Volkov knew that Kaelen had weakness. "You can't just pack up my life because it's convenient for you," she said, but there was no heat in her words, only a weary acceptance. "This isn't about convenience," he countered, his thumb tracing her jawline. "It's about necessity. Your safety is non-negotiable. This penthouse is a fortress. Your apartment is a fishbowl." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "This is your home now, if you want it to be." Home. The word echoed in the vast, cold space. It wasn't a home yet, but with him in it, it had the potential to be. "Okay," she whispered. A look of intense satisfaction crossed his features. He kissed her forehead, a gesture of pure possessive affection. "Good. We'll go this afternoon. My men will handle it." A few hours later, Elara found herself standing in the middle of her own modest apartment. It felt like a museum exhibit from a previous life. The cheerful yellow kitchen towels, the framed prints on the wall, the small, thriving succulent on the windowsill. It all belonged to a woman who hadn't yet had her heart broken, who hadn't been kissed by a storm, who hadn't seen a man beg for his life. Kaelen was with her, a formidable presence that made her small living room seem even smaller. Two of his men, including the stoic Marcus, moved with silent efficiency, packing her clothes, her books, her personal items into sturdy cardboard boxes. They were respectful, almost reverent, handling her possessions with a care that surprised her. "It's not all going to fit your aesthetic," she said to Kaelen, a weak attempt at humor as Marcus carefully wrapped her collection of vintage teacups in bubble wrap. Kaelen's lips quirked. "I have no aesthetic. I have a secure location. Your things will make it feel less like one." He walked over to her bookshelf, his fingers trailing over the spines of her novels. He picked up a small, framed photograph of her and her mother, taken years ago. He didn't say anything, just looked at it for a long moment before placing it carefully into an open box. His quiet acknowledgement of what was important to her sent a wave of warmth through her. He wasn't just moving a woman in, he was moving her in, all of her. The process was quick and clinical. Within an hour, the essence of her life was packed away. As they prepared to leave, Elara took one last look around the empty, echoing space. There was no sadness, only a sense of finality. She was closing a door, not on a life, but on a version of herself that was no longer enough. Back at the penthouse, a change had already begun. Her boxes were stacked neatly in a corner of the vast living area, a promise of a future taking root. Kaelen had a business call to make, retreating to his office with a promise to be quick. Left alone, Elara wandered to the massive glass wall. The afternoon sun was warm on her face. She felt strangely calm, centered. The terror of the morning had receded, processed and compartmentalized.
She had looked into the darkness and had not been consumed. Instead, she had found a strange, fierce strength within herself. Kaelen found her there some time later, still gazing out at the city. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on top of her head. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For not running." He turned her in his arms to face him. His gray eyes were clear, the shadows of the morning gone for now. He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of commitment and a quiet, burgeoning joy. It was different from the desperate passion of the first night, different from the tender reassurance of a few hours ago. This was a kiss of belonging. The days that followed settled into a new, unexpected rhythm. Kaelen was a busy man, his phone a constant low-level presence, his attention often demanded by the invisible empire he ruled. But when he was with her, his focus was absolute. He was fully, completely present. He learned that she loved old black and white movies, and one evening he had a classic film projector set up and they watched Casablanca on a blank wall, sharing a bowl of popcorn like a normal couple. He discovered she was a terrible cook, and instead of hiring a chef, he stood behind her in the kitchen, his arms around her, guiding her hands as she chopped vegetables, his low laughter in her ear when she made a mess. They were small, simple moments, but in the context of his dangerous life, they felt monumental. They were building a world for two inside his fortress of glass and steel. One evening, as they sat on the sofa, her legs draped over his lap, he told her about his childhood, not the dark parts, but the early memories of a mother who loved music and a father who taught him to play chess. He spoke in vague terms, but she heard the love and the loss in his voice. She, in turn, told him about losing her mother to illness, about the quiet loneliness of her life before him. They were sharing pieces of their souls, building a foundation of trust brick by brick. The romance was a constant, humming undercurrent. It was in the way his eyes darkened when she entered a room, the way his hand always found the small of her back, the way he would wake her in the middle of the night with soft kisses and endearments, making love to her with a reverence that made her feel worshipped. He was a man of intense passions, and she was the sole focus of all of them. But the outside world was never far away. Marcus would appear for briefings, his eyes always flicking to her with that same assessing look before he spoke in low tones to Kaelen. The name Volkov was mentioned more than once, always followed by a hardening of Kaelen's expression. 1 week after she had moved in, the storm clouds gathered again. Kaelen had been on the phone for over an hour, his voice a low, angry growl. When he finally ended the call, he walked to the window, his back to her, his shoulders tense. "Kaelen," I said softly, setting down my book.
He didn't turn around. Volkov is getting bold. He's testing my borders, making moves on my shipping routes. He finally looked at her, and the cold fury in his eyes was a chilling sight. He sees your presence as a distraction, a vulnerability he can exploit. A shiver of fear traced Elara's spine. What does that mean? It means he's trying to provoke me, to make me act recklessly. He walked toward her, his expression softening as he looked down at her. It means I have to be more careful than ever, and so do you. "I'm not afraid," she said, and she was surprised to find that it was mostly true. "You should be," he said bluntly. "But fear is a tool. It keeps you alert." He cupped her face. "I will end this Volkov problem, permanently, but it will take time. And until then, you will have a shadow. Wherever you go, one of my men will be with you. There will be no arguments." She nodded. She understood the rules of this world now. He kissed her, a hard, possessive kiss. "No one will take you from me, Elara. No one." The conviction in his voice was absolute. He was no longer just protecting her. He was defending what was his. Their sanctuary, their fragile, newfound peace was under threat.
That night, as they lay in bed, Elara curled against his side, she felt not fear, but a fierce, protective anger of her own. This man who had pulled her from the ashes of her old life, who showed her a strength and a passion she never knew she possessed, was being challenged, and she would not be the cause of his downfall. She would be his strength. She fell asleep with one thought crystal clear in her mind. She was in this now, fully. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The calm was over. The storm was coming back, and this time, she was ready to stand in the rain with him. The shadow Kaelen assigned her was a man named Leo. He was younger than Marcus, with a quiet intensity and eyes that missed nothing. He drove her to and from her job at the design firm, a presence of silent, formidable protection that made her colleagues whisper, but also made her feel a strange sense of safety. Life took on a new, dual rhythm. The sunlit hours of normalcy, where she worked on logos and marketing campaigns, and the hidden world of the penthouse, where the air crackled with tension and the threat of Volkov loomed. Kaelen was gone more often, his meetings stretching late into the night. He never spoke of the details, but she could see the toll it took. The lines around his eyes were deeper, the set of his jaw harder. But when he came home to her, the hardness would melt away. He would find her, whether she was reading on the sofa or sketching at the table, and he would simply hold her, burying his face in her hair as if drawing strength from her very presence. One evening, he came home earlier than expected. She was in the kitchen, attempting to follow a recipe, a comical sight of flour dusting her nose and the countertops. He leaned against the doorway, watching her for a long moment, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. It was a rare, unguarded expression that made her heart flip. "Come here," he said, his voice soft. She wiped her hands on a towel and went to him. He didn't kiss her. He just wrapped his arms around her and held her tightly. "It's almost over," he murmured against her hair. "A few more days. Then Volkov will be a memory and this will all be behind us." Relief washed through her, so potent it made her knees weak. "I'm glad." He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "There's an event tomorrow night, a museum gala. I need to be seen there, to show strength, not fear." His gaze was intent. "I want you with me." The thought of another gala, of the glittering crowds and the prying eyes, sent a spike of anxiety through her. The last one had been the start of everything. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "The best idea," he said, his voice firm. "I want everyone to see you by my side. I want them to see that you are not a vulnerability. You are my strength. Let them see what I have. Let him see." She knew who him was. Alistair. He would be there, of course. The thought no longer brought pain, or even anger. It brought a quiet, steely resolve. "Okay," she said. "I'll be there." The night of the gala, a package arrived. Inside was a dress. It wasn't the simple black sheath from before. This was a weapon, a gown of deep blood-red silk cut with a master's hand to hug her curves and sweep dramatically to the floor. It was bold, powerful, and utterly breathtaking. With it were a pair of diamond earrings. It sparkled with a cold, brilliant fire. When she emerged from the bedroom, dressed and ready, Kaelen, who was adjusting his cufflinks in the living room, went perfectly still. His eyes darkened, sweeping over her from head to toe, a look of such raw, primal possession, the air left her lungs. "You are a vision," he said, his voice husky. He walked to her, his fingers gently tracing the neckline of the dress. "Every man in that room will envy me tonight, and every woman will envy you." He took her hand and led her to the full-length mirror. Standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders, he met her gaze in the reflection. They were a picture of devastating power. Him in his impeccably tailored black tuxedo, a king of the night. Her in the stunning red gown, his queen, his equal in every way that mattered. "Remember," he whispered, his lips close to her ear, "you hold my heart. You are the most powerful person in any room we walk into. Never forget that." The gala was a whirlwind of light, music, and opulence, even grander than the last. And just as before, their entrance caused a ripple. But this time, it was different. The whispers weren't of shock or pity, they were of awe. Kaelen's hand was a constant, possessive presence on the small of her back as he moved through the crowd, his demeanor of one of unshakable authority. People approached him with deference, their eyes flicking to Elara with a new, respectful curiosity. And then she saw him. Alistair was across the room, a glass of champagne frozen halfway to his lips. He was staring at her, his face a comical mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He saw the dress that cost more than his car, the diamonds glittering at her ears, the effortless way she carried herself, but most of all, he saw the way Kaelen looked at her, as if she were the center of his universe. Kaelen felt her slight tension and followed his gaze. A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. "Come, Mila moja," he murmured, a Russian endearment he had started using in their most private moments. "Let's say hello." He guided her directly towards Alistair, who looked like a rabbit caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. "Pierce," Kaelen said, his tone cordial yet dripping with condescension. Kaelen, Alistair, you look, well." "Doesn't she?" Kaelen agreed, his gaze sweeping over her with open admiration, before returning to Alistair, the warmth instantly freezing over. "Prosperity becomes her. It's remarkable what happens when a woman is truly valued, isn't it?" Alistair flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth, no doubt to try and offer some weak apology to salvage a shred of his dignity. But Kaelen was done. He had no interest in the man's words. He had only brought her over to deliver a message, not with words, but with an action that would be seared into Alistair's memory forever. He turned to Elara, completely dismissing Alistair's existence. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. His winter gray eyes, usually so cold, burned with a fierce, adoring fire that was for her and her alone. "Let him watch," he whispered, his voice so low only she could hear, echoing the promise of their very first night. Let him see the woman he failed to keep. And then he kissed her. It was not a chaste peck for show. It was a deep, consuming, passionate kiss that spoke of late nights and soft whispers, of fierce protection and tender devotion. It was a kiss that laid their entire souls bare for anyone to see. Elara melted into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, kissing him back with all the love and trust that had grown in the heart of the storm. The gala, Alistair, the threat of Volkov, it all faded away. There was only him and her, and the undeniable truth of what they were to each other. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathless. The room was utterly silent, every eye fixed on them. Kaelen didn't even glance at Alistair. He kept his eyes locked on hers, his thumb stroking her flushed cheek. "Let's go home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He led her from the ballroom, the crowd parting for them once more. They didn't speak in the car. They didn't need to. His hand held hers, their fingers laced together, a silent testament to their united front. Back in the penthouse, he led her not to the bedroom, but to the glass wall overlooking the city. He stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her, holding her close.
"It's done," he said quietly. "The last of Volkov's operations were dismantled tonight while we were at the gala. It's over." A profound sense of peace settled over her. The external threat was gone. The ghost of her past had been laid to rest in the most public way imaginable. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had seen her broken and had not looked away, who had shown her his own darkness and trusted her not to flinch. "I love you, Kaelen," she whispered. It was the first time she had said the words, but they felt as natural as breathing. He stilled, his eyes searching hers, and for a heart-stopping second she saw a vulnerability in him so deep it stole her breath. Then a look of pure, unadulterated joy transformed his face, banishing the last of the shadows. He dropped to one knee. Elara's hands flew to her mouth, a gasp escaping her. From his pocket he drew a small black velvet box. He opened it. Nestled inside was a ring. A magnificent deep blue sapphire, the color of a midnight sky, surrounded by brilliant diamonds. It was unique, powerful, and utterly perfect. "Elara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, his gray eyes shining with unshed tears. "You walked into my storm and became my calm. You saw the monster and found the man.
You are my strength, my heart, my everything. Marry me. Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you just how cherished you are." Tears streamed freely down her face. Tears of joy, of relief, of a love so profound it felt like it could move mountains. "Yes," she breathed, her voice cracking. "Yes, Kaelen. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and surged to his feet, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around, a laugh of pure, unburdened happiness rumbling in his chest. When he set her down, he kissed her, a kiss that tasted of forever. Later, as they lay entwined in the quiet dark, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare back, she knew the journey was complete. The lost woman at the first gala was gone. In her place was a queen, loved, protected, and stronger than she had ever dreamed possible. The storm had not destroyed her, it had forged her. And in its wake she had found a love that was as fierce, as lasting, and as unbreakable as the man who held her in his arms. They had faced the past and conquered the present, and now a future, bright and boundless, stretched out before them. Did their fierce love story captivate you? If you're yearning for more tales of protective heroes, heart-stopping romance, and thrilling drama, make sure to subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you loved most about Kaelen and Elara's journey. Your support inspires our next story.